안녕하세요.
The morning in Seoul was wrapped in thick clouds as the glass elevator of Hanseong Group descended from the 48th floor. Inside, surrounded by silence and brushed steel, stood Kang Joon-ho, the billionaire CEO, known as much for his ruthless efficiency in business as for his complete lack of romantic scandals. He stared at the city skyline, mind adrift in numbers and board meetings, until the elevator stopped on the 15th floor, interrupted by an unexpected presence. "Oh, sorry. I thought it was empty," said a young woman, stepping back with a stack of papers in her hands. "Come in," he replied, eyes still fixed on the window. She entered hesitantly, and the elevator resumed its descent. Joon-ho finally turned his head, intrigued by the uncomfortable silence that was so rare in his world. But what struck him the most was that she didn't look at him, as if she didn't know or didn't care who he was. That to him was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. She clutched the papers tightly, as though they were shields against the awkward moment, avoiding eye contact and staying in a corner. Her demeanor was the opposite of the fawning behavior he usually faced. Downstairs at the lobby cafe a few minutes later, she sat near the window waiting for a tardy colleague. Papers spread across the table. She appeared absorbed in calculations or a report. Still strangely drawn to her, Joon-ho did something he hadn't done since becoming CEO. He sat to have coffee in the open area. He couldn't explain why, but a strange curiosity stirred within him. "Do you work in accounting?" he asked casually. She looked up calmly. "Yes. Oinha. Zekont Division." "I'm Kang Joon-ho," he offered, expecting surprise. "I know," she replied, returning her focus to the papers. Joon-ho suppressed a smile. This was new and unsettling, but strangely refreshing. The way she treated him, without exaggerated reverence, gave him an almost childlike sense of being seen as human, a feeling he hadn't realized he missed. At the end of the day, as he walked through the underground parking lot, Joon-ho saw Eun-ha again, now struggling with a box of files that nearly toppled off a cart. He hesitated for a moment, then approached with slow steps. "You should ask for help," he said, watching her effort. "Everyone has more important things to do," she replied firmly, still unaware of who he was. "Not everyone." She looked up and met his eyes. This time, there was a faint smile, as if she recognized that the CEO wasn't as untouchable as he seemed. The moment between them lasted mere seconds, but it carried a deep emotional weight. Joon-ho, used to strategic silences and calculated words, felt vulnerable before her spontaneity. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not as a brand, but as a man. That night, seated in his luxurious penthouse with its panoramic windows, Joon-ho couldn't get Eun-ha out of his mind. She wasn't like the others, not sycophantic, not indifferent. She was real. There was something in her eyes that disarmed him, something he couldn't quite interpret. The wine in his glass sat untouched as he gazed at the city lights, trying to find logic in an attraction that defied every rule. "Why doesn't she try to get close like all the others?" he murmured to himself, staring at the wine. The silence of the house amplified questions he'd never asked before. And for the first time, Kang Joon-ho felt he was losing control, not of his company, but of his own solitude. And that thought terrified him more than any financial risk. The next morning, Eun-ha passed through the lobby with determined steps, not glancing to either side. But from the mezzanine staircase above, Joon-ho watched her silently, hands tucked into his blazer pockets. It was as if he were studying an emotional puzzle. "Mr. Kang," his assistant called, breaking his reverie. "The meeting with the board starts in 10 minutes. "Make it 20, he replied. He descended slowly, his eyes still on her. The world around him faded into the background. In that moment, Joon-ho knew one thing. He didn't know her, but he wanted to. And that desire, in a world built on appearances, might just become the greatest risk he'd ever taken. The following week at Hanseong Group began with tension buzzing in the boardroom like static. The company's overseas partners were threatening to pull out of a major deal, and all eyes were on Kang Joon-ho to fix it. Yet, as he sat at the head of the long oak table, surrounded by stern executives and anxious advisors, his mind briefly flickered to Eun-ha. The thought startled him. He straightened his tie, masking the distraction, and picked up the presentation clicker with a practiced hand.
VLL Restructure the proposal.
If they don't bite, we pivot. No panic, he said, voice steady and devoid of emotion. The room nodded in collective relief. Junho's reputation as a strategic mastermind gave them confidence, but he was already drifting. His gaze had settled on the skyline behind the thick glass panel. As if the concrete and lights held answers he couldn't extract from balance sheets. Back on the 15th floor, the atmosphere was different but no less stressful. Eun-ha was elbow-deep in reports and financial data. A miscalculation in the previous quarter's summaries had triggered an internal audit, and her department was scrambling. "If I don't fix this, it'll look like I'm incompetent," she muttered, biting her lip as she cross-referenced documents. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but she didn't slow down. Her colleagues whispered nearby, voices tense. "She's working overtime every day. Doesn't even eat lunch. I heard if this audit goes badly, her whole team could be penalized." Their whispers only added to her pressure. She moved between desks, fingers flying across keyboards, cross-checking invoices and financial statements. Her superior, Director Choi, had all but blamed her in the morning meeting, and it was now a personal mission to prove herself. That afternoon, fate staged another encounter. As Junho strolled through the accounting floor unannounced, an event so rare it sucked the noise out of the room, he caught sight of a familiar figure locked in a heated, hushed argument. "The numbers won't match if we don't track the vendor transactions properly," Eun-ha said firmly to Director Choi. "I'm aware," the man replied, defensive. "But it's not your place to question protocol." Before the tension could boil over, Junho stepped in. "Actually, she's right. Check line 34 of the vendor report." Head snapped toward him. An eerie hush fell. Choi's eyes widened. "Mr. Kong," he stammered, "I didn't realize you were." "Don't worry about appearances. Worry about results," Junho said, his tone cutting through the tension. He turned to Eun-ha. "You have good instincts. Don't let anyone make you doubt them." Her expression softened, layers of surprise and gratitude unfolding all at once. She bowed slightly, but held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. It was the first time someone in power had acknowledged her not just as competent, but as exceptional. That evening, as the city was wrapped in a soft drizzle, Eun-ha stood beneath the Hanseong building's glass awning.
The light rain painted evading in silver.
She didn't move, just stood there, watching umbrellas bob along the pavement like floating lilies. The moment with Junho echoed in her mind. His voice, his unexpected defense of her, the way his eyes seemed to really see her. It lingered in her chest, stubborn and warm. Across the street, inside a black sedan, Junho sat behind tinted windows, watching her. He told himself he wasn't following her. He had simply finished late. But deep down, even he knew that wasn't the truth. His driver adjusted the rearview mirror. "Home, sir." Junho didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained locked on Eun-ha as she finally pulled out her umbrella and disappeared down the sidewalk. "Take a detour," he said. "Let's drive for a bit." As the car moved, Seoul's lights streaked across the windows like falling stars. But Junho didn't see any of it. He was consumed by a question he didn't dare ask aloud. What is it about her that dismantles everything I've built to protect myself? That night, alone in his penthouse once again, he stood at the window holding a glass of untouched whiskey.
Below, the city buzzed on.
But all he could think of was a girl who spoke with certainty, who dared to challenge her superiors, and who didn't shrink before power. And somewhere in the hollow spaces of his guarded heart, something stirred. It wasn't just interest anymore. It was the beginning of a quiet unraveling. The first snowfall of the season blanketed Seoul in white, but the chill that settled over Hanseong Group came from within its marble walls. Rumors had begun to circulate, whispers of corporate betrayal, stock manipulations, and a hidden hand working from the shadows. Kong Junho had sensed it before anyone else, a subtle shift in the company's pulse, like a skipped heartbeat before cardiac arrest. In the CEO's private office, he stood alone, gazing out the frosted window, lost in thought. He clutched a file in his hand, marked confidential. Inside were preliminary reports suggesting one of his board members had leaked sensitive information to a rival conglomerate. But there were no names, no proof, just speculation, carefully worded and shadowed in ambiguity. He turned to his assistant. "Bring me a complete staff interaction report for the last quarter.
And highlight anomalies in accounting.
I want everything that doesn't fit."
Yes, Mr. Kang.
Right away. Once alone again, he opened a drawer and pulled out a flash drive. Plugging it into his laptop, he examined encrypted logs that only he and his late father had ever accessed. His jaw tightened as he uncovered discrepancies in foreign accounts linked to minor project departments, places that rarely attracted attention. Someone had been clever, but not clever enough. Downstairs, Eun-ha worked quietly, oblivious to the storm brewing above. She had earned respect after the audit, but the weight of that respect came with new burdens. Her direct manager, Director Choi, still bitter and humiliated, now handed her the most tedious and time-consuming tasks, hoping she'd slip up. But she didn't. If anything, she worked harder. Late that evening, as the office lights dimmed and the building emptied, Eun-ha remained at her desk. She reviewed procurement invoices and vendor records with a highlighter and a cold cup of coffee. Her pen tapped rhythmically as she stared at a transaction that didn't make sense, an overseas vendor payment that had been approved outside of protocol. The numbers matched, but the signature did not. Frowning, she scribbled a note and flagged the file. A knock startled her.
Still walking. Jean-Ho's voice echoed through the quiet office.
He stepped inside, holding 2 cups of warm coffee. "Just finishing," she replied, flustered. "I found something strange in the payment logs." She handed him the document, expecting a glance at most. Instead, he studied it carefully, his brow furrowing. "You might have just found the crack I was looking for," he murmured, more to himself than to her. They sat side by side for an hour, shoulders barely apart, going through files in a silence that didn't feel awkward. Occasionally, their hands brushed as they turned pages. Neither acknowledged it, but the contact lingered longer each time. The air between them was charged, not with flirtation, but tension, trust, and unspoken understanding. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, eyes fixed on the ledger. "Because you see what others miss," he said simply. "And because you're not afraid of the truth." A moment passed. Then 2. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she nodded slowly, and they continued working in silence.
Suddenly, the door burst open.
His assistant stood there, breathless. "Mr. Kang." The audit department just flagged an irregularity. Someone tried to erase part of the vendor log from the central server. Jun-ho stood instantly.
"Shoot down all external access.
No one leaves the building until we know who did it."
Eun-ha is eiswiedend.
"You think it's someone inside?" He looked at her. "I know it is. They've already started covering their tracks. That means we're close."
The night descended in chaos.
IT sealed the servers.
Security monitored exits.
A handful of executives were asked to remain. Eun-ha stayed behind voluntarily, her curiosity burning. In a moment of quiet, she approached Jun-ho with a folder of her own findings. "There's a secondary signature I traced to a proxy vendor," she said, voice trembling slightly. "It was listed under an unregistered subsidiary, created 6 months ago. Someone's laundering through company resources." He looked at her, genuinely impressed. "How did you find this?" "I stayed curious. And I don't like being underestimated." Jun-ho smiled for the first time that day. Not the polite professional curve of the lips he showed the board, but something real. Soft. Warmer. Hours later, they finally exited the building together. Snow fell thicker now, swirling in the streetlights like glowing feathers.
The wind howled down the empty avenue.
At the entrance, Jun-ho turned to her, his coat dusted in white.
"Be careful, Eun-ha.
Whoever's behind this, they won't stop just because we're catching up." She nodded, pulling her scarf tighter. "Then we better not stop either." He opened the car door for her, a rare gesture from a man known for emotional distance. She paused, looked at him with quiet confusion, then got in without a word. He followed, and the car pulled away, leaving 2 trails of tire marks in the snow. Inside the car, silence stretched, but it wasn't cold. He watched her reflection in the window. She stared ahead, but her hand, resting on the seat between them, slowly opened, an unspoken invitation. He didn't take it. Not yet. But he didn't look away either. And in that moment, something shifted. No longer allies by convenience, but partners in something deeper. A shared secret, a shared danger, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a shared destiny. The winter sun rose behind thick clouds, casting a gray pallor over the towering skyscrapers of Seoul.
Inside the Hanseon Group headquarters, tension hung like invisible ihre stretchticht, waiting to snap.
Security had been heightened. Every department was under quiet scrutiny. Whispers flew from cubicle to cubicle like dry leaves in wind, crackling with speculation and paranoia.
On the 35th floor, the boardroom felt colder than usual.
The walls, lined with glass and modern art, did nothing to soften the unease that permeated the air. Kong Joon-ho stood at the head of the conference table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. A thick dossier lay before him, open to a spreadsheet highlighting financial irregularities connected to an offshore account. Hamey Holdings has no physical address, no legal records in Korea, and yet it's moved over 4 billion won in the last fiscal year. Who approved this partnership? He demanded.
Murmurs Rose.
Director Choi glanced at his notes, then met Joon-ho's eyes. The subsidiary was cleared by the previous CFO months before the merger. The CFO who resigned suddenly after our internal restructure? Joon-ho countered.
Convenient.
One of the older board members, Mr. Huang, shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps this warrants external review. No, Joon-ho said, his voice flat. This stays internal. If we involve outsiders now, the media will smell blood. Back in the operations department, Eun-ha was piecing together something far more dangerous. The charity she traced earlier, Mirai Future Foundation, wasn't just a shell account. It was a front tied to 3 other smaller funds, each routing money in and out of Hanseong's project budgets. She printed the ledgers and attached sticky notes with handwritten connections. Her desk resembled a miniature crime lab. She didn't notice the man watching her from the end of the hall. A figure in a gray trench coat, obscured by the frosted glass. As she turned to fetch another file, the figure vanished. Later that afternoon, a quiet knock came to her desk. "You've drawn attention," said a soft, measured voice. Eun-ha looked up to see Mrs. Kong, elegant in pearls and a tailored navy coat. "Madam Kong," she stammered, standing quickly. The older woman gave her a faint smile. "I see why he's fond of you.
Intelligent. Sharp.
But don't mistake usefulness for belonging."
With respect, I will never presume it. God.
"Because my son's world is glass, dear."
Transparent. Fragile. One misstep and everything shatters.
She left as gracefully as she arrived, her heels clicking like a metronome of doom.
Ein hazard back down, heart pounding.
She wasn't intimidated, only more aware of how deeply she was in. Hours later, the office emptied, but Eun-ha remained. She checked the logs from the internal server breach and noticed a timestamp that aligned with Director Choi's access. She printed it out, circled the entry, and made a copy, just in case. As she stepped into the parking garage, cold air bit through her coat.
Her kasat alone under Adem Light.
Just as she reached for the handle, a shadow moved behind a column. She froze. "Who's there?" she called. No answer. Then, "Don't panic," said a familiar voice. Joon-ho emerged, holding out his phone. "You've been followed." Her eyes widened. "By who?" "That's what I intend to find out. But you're not going home alone tonight." Inside his car, the air was warm, but the silence was tense. "Why didn't you tell me your family was watching me?" she asked. "Because it doesn't change what I feel. And because they've never approved of anything I've done. Not when it mattered." She stared at him, searching for sincerity. And what exactly do you feel, Junho? He looked at her. That I trust you more than anyone else in my life.
That he can't stop thinking about you.
That if anything happens to you because of this investigation, I'll never forgive myself. She reached out and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his palm to meet hers. Just then, his phone rang. He answered.
Silence.
Then a voice distorted by static. You're digging too deep. Back off.
Or the girl pies. Ein heiß Brit kaukt.
Who is this? Junho barked.
Clay. Silence.
He clenched his jaw, then looked at her. This changes everything.
Wie go to the police? To nicht.
She shook her head. And expose the company to scandal?
Your enemies want that.
We play smarter. He met her eyes. Then you stay close.
You don't leave the office without them eh.
Understood.
Only if you promise not to shoot them eh out. Vire in this togeteer, remember.
His grip tightened around her hand. Together. Above them, the storm clouds finally burst. Rain fell in icy sheets, washing over the city. But inside that car, something unshakable was forged. Loyalty, partnership, and the first flickers of a love strong enough to survive the fire yet to come. The cold of early spring seeped through the cracks of the Kong estate, a sprawling mansion perched atop a secluded hill in Gangnam. Though flowers had begun to bloom beyond the wrought iron gates, inside the house, the mood was frigid. Junho sat stiffly in the drawing room, surrounded by his family. His father in a charcoal suit, his stepmother with a steely glint in her eyes, and his half-brother Min-kyu, lazily scrolling through his phone as if none of it mattered. She's not one of us, Mr. Kong said at last, voice low but firm. This obsession is clouding your judgment, Junho.
Wie reiset you better tan this?
She's not an obsession, Junho replied, jaw tight. She's the only person in this company actually trying to fix our mess, while the rest of you play politics. Mrs. Kong leaned forward. And you think sleeping with her is going to clean up our name?
You're dragging Hanseong down with you.
This company was compromised long before she walked into it, he said. Eun-ha has integrity. Something this family lost a long time ago. Min-kyu smirked.
You think love will protect you? You're delusional.
The board is already talking impeachment. Junho stood.
Let them talk. I'm not stepping down.
Not while criminals still sit among us.
Silence fell like a curtain, thick and cold.
His father stared at him, disappointment hardening into something darker. Then don't expect our support when the storm breaks. Back at the company, Eun-ha was poring over audit reports when someone slipped an envelope onto her desk.
No Sender.
Inside were printed screenshots of her and Junho, one at the cafe, another in the garage, and one in the office stairwell, too close to ignore. At the bottom, does love survive betrayal? Her hands trembled. Someone was watching them both. Just then, an email popped up on her screen, from an internal address. One word, resign. Her heartbeat spiked. Was this an intimidation tactic? Or a warning? Her phone buzzed. It was a private number. If you care for him, you'll walk away, a distorted voice said.
Ten Silence.
Later that night, Junho brought her to a rooftop overlooking the Han River. The air was cool, the city below glowing with a buzz of weekend life. He didn't speak at first, just stared out at the water. They want me out, he finally said. I have 3 days before the board votes. Eun-ha looked at him. And what will you do? Fight. But I need proof. Real proof. Enough to bring down every corrupted name tied to this. She nodded slowly. Then let's expose them all. Together. He turned to her.
Are you ready to lose everything? She stepped closer. Not if he have you.
They kissed beneath the neon sky, not out of passion, but out of defiance. A pledge. A shield. 3 floors below, In a black car parked across the street, someone lowered a pair of binoculars and made a call. They're not backing down.
Iniziate Phase 2.
The next morning, news broke. An anonymous whistleblower had leaked internal corruption files from Hanseong Group. The media was in a frenzy. Headlines flooded the digital sphere. Hanseong Group under fire, embezzlement, bribery allegations surface. CEO Kong Joon-ho silent amid scandal. Board demands action. Stocks plummeted. Investors panicked. In the boardroom, voices were raised, threats exchanged. The board demanded Joon-ho's immediate suspension. But when they entered his office, they found it empty, his desk cleared, the chair spinning slowly. Across the city, at a small hotel under a false name, Joon-ho and Eun-ha watched the reports in silence. Eun-ha's fingers gripped the edge of a laptop as the news anchors speculated wildly. "They've declared war," she whispered. He nodded. "Good. Because now we fight on our terms." That night, they devised a strategy. Eun-ha would pose as a whistleblower in communication with a journalist known for exposing corporate corruption. Joon-ho would feed her classified files through encrypted channels. Min-kyu, careless and arrogant, had left his tablet logged into Hanseong's executive server. Unbeknownst to him, it became their window into the rot. Over the following days, they released calculated leaks, financial records, board member emails, illegal offshore transfers. Public opinion began to shift. Instead of blaming Joon-ho, netizens praised the anonymous insider. Meanwhile, the board scrambled. Someone had gone rogue. Someone had made the mistake of underestimating the very people they sought to silence. Eun-ha glanced at Joon-ho one morning, their shoulders brushing in the tiny hotel kitchenette. "We're making enemies."
Dangerous honest.
He smiled faintly. "Then we must be doing something right." Outside, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds. It shone over a city about to change, and a love that, tested by fire, refused to burn out. The Hanseong shareholders meeting was set for 9 a.m., but by 8 o'clock, the lobby of the main tower was already a beehive of tension. News vans crowded the curb, investors clutched briefcases to their chests, and murmurs floated through the air like smoke. The press was relentless, shouting questions into the cold morning wind. Will Kong Joon-ho appear today? Is it true the board plans to remove him? What about the scandal involving his assistant?
The elevator chimed on the 47th floor.
Inside the boardroom, where every chair cost more than a car, the board members sat like stone judges. The atmosphere was brittle. Even the espresso tasted bitter this morning. "Let's proceed," barked Mr. Kong, ignoring the vacant chair at the head of the table. "The shareholders are demanding leadership." Min-kyu, dressed immaculately in a custom three-piece suit, smirked. "Then let's give them a future, without distractions." As the chairman raised his gavel, the double doors slammed open. Joon-ho entered with quiet authority, flanked by his legal team and Eun-ha. Her appearance drew audible gasps, prim, poised, and unmistakably defiant. "Sorry to interrupt," Joon-ho said, "but I have evidence that demands your full attention." He placed a thick, tabbed dossier on the table. Inside, forensic audits, offshore records, encrypted email threads. The culmination of weeks of shadow work. The room grew colder as the truth bled across the glossy mahogany table.
Min-kyu palette. This is slender.
"It's a reckoning," Joon-ho corrected.
Eun-ha steppet forward.
"Every detail has been verified by independent investigators and submitted to the authorities this morning." The chairman stared at them both. Then, with a heavy sigh, turned to the board. Motion to suspend all named individuals pending legal review.
Hans reiset. Unanimous.
Min-kyu was escorted out, his protest drowned by camera flashes.
Mr. Kang stood slowly.
His voice was grave. "You've declared war on your own blood." Joon-ho met his gaze. "No. I declared peace for the future." Outside, they exited through the side elevators, away from the chaos. As they reached the underground garage, Unha turned to him. "You didn't flinch. Not when you were beside me." 2 weeks passed. The company stabilized, its name slowly recovering as headlines shifted from scandal to reform. Share prices rose again, and inside Hanseong's headquarters, something felt different: less fear, more purpose. Unha was offered a permanent leadership role. She hesitated, knowing what it meant. But Junho gave her space, never pushing. One evening, as they stood again on the rooftop where their plans had begun, he took her hand. "I once inherited an empire I didn't believe in," he said.
Now I want to build a meeting I Donnerstag with you.
He opened the velvet box.
A silver band, set with a single diamond. Elegant, strong. Marry me, Unha.
Let's write the rest of this story together. Tears traced her cheeks.
Yes. A thousand times, yes.
The ceremony, months later, was held at a seaside chapel where waves whispered against the rocks. Unha wore a soft ivory gown. Junho waited beneath an arch of wildflowers, his heart lighter than it had ever been. In the front row, employees from every level of Hanseong sat side by side, security guards beside executives, secretaries beside department heads. Unity, not hierarchy. After the vows, as the sun sank into the horizon, Junho whispered to her, "I built skyscrapers for years, but nothing as lasting as this moment." Unha smiled. "Then let's keep building." Their honeymoon was simple, a quiet trip to Jeju Island, just the two of them.
No press, no board meetings, no legacy, just love.
A year later, a new department opened within Hanseong Group, the Transparency Initiative, led by Unha. She arrived at work each day with her baby girl nestled in a sling and a soft smile that told the world, you can have both, power and love, ambition and warmth. And in the penthouse office, where the city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, CEO Kong Junho now worked with the door open, because he had nothing left to hide. Together, they had not only rebuilt a company, they had redefined it. And through the struggle, betrayal, and redemption, they discovered that true legacy isn't found in numbers, but in the hearts you change along the way. In the end, theirs wasn't just a love story. It was a revolution. And it was only just beginning.
Seasons come and go, oh, our love will always grow. Through the storms and gentle rain, we'll bloom and start again. You're my eternal